Welcome everyone to the latest webinar from FlightGlobal to examine the impact of the global crisis created by the coronavirus pandemic on the aviation industry. I'm Max Kingsley-Jones and I'll be your host today for our webinar examining how international airports will need to adapt in the wake of COVID-19, which we are presenting in association with Collins Aerospace. As aviation begins a slow recovery, passenger behaviour and the rules around air travel are fundamentally changing. Airports will have to adjust to this new reality with radical technologies and ways of managing passenger flows. I'm delighted to be joined today by 4 experts from the airport sector who can provide their thoughts and insight around the challenges ahead and the opportunities that new technology could offer to tackle them. My panelists are Chris Garton, who is the Chief Solutions Officer for Heathrow Airport, Ersin Inakul, who is the Chief Digital and Commercial Officer at Istanbul Airport, Antoine Rostvorsky, who is Deputy Director General Programs and Services at ACI World, and from Collins Aerospace, Tony Chapman, who is Senior Director, Product Management and Strategy at Global Airports. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Before we start, a quick bit of housekeeping. This discussion is timed for about an hour, and while we have many discussion points for our panel, we'd also like to try and answer as many of your questions too. You can type them in using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, but you can't see other open questions. I'm sure we have a lot of questions, so don't be confused if you don't see others in there. There will be others coming through. My colleague, Lewis Harper, who is Managing Editor of Airline Business Magazine, will be selecting the questions for me to pose. So there will be a filter process going on. So I think to start with, it'd be nice to just get a scene setting from, it won't be a very nice scene, unfortunately, but I'm going to ask Antoine from ACI World to just tell us a little bit about the dreadful damage that this virus has done to the airport business over the last few months, and maybe a little bit about how you see the recovery playing out in the short to medium term.
Yes, thank you very much, Max. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everywhere for all participants and all colleagues, panelists on this. Wish I would have great news to share. Hopefully that will come. But if you look at the numbers, of course, impact of the pandemic, you probably heard different numbers there and there, and unfortunately they have not been getting better over the past few months. But as you remember, before this pandemic, numbers were on average worldwide between 2010 and 19, increase in 5.5% average increase per year in passenger volume. Of course, right in the first quarter of this year in 2020, we saw 28.4% drop. And of course, Q2 got even a lot worse, where we saw declines in domestic markets of 90.7%. And international and passenger volume, 98.9% at a certain time than in Q2. Now, overall for 2020, based on all the numbers we have, and we see that when you talk to different entities, everyone's fairly aligned at this stage. We're seeing, expecting a drop of 50% in passenger volumes in the global of 2020 year, and in about 20 to 25% drop in passenger flights and movements. Of course, this is related to load factors and needs to be revised on a monthly basis. Every region worldwide has been hit, some worse than others. But in terms of losses in billions of US dollars, just to give you an idea, industry losses expected for 2020 are at 97.4 billion US dollars. That's a 57% decline in industry revenues. And like I said, all regions are hit at this stage. We expect Asia Pacific and Europe to be close to 60% in losses, but all regions pretty much over 50% loss in revenue. So drastic. Of course, just to give an image of size, I mean, a typical hub of 40 million passengers generates about 1.3 billion US dollars per year. So we're talking to the equivalent of 75 of the busiest worldwide hubs in terms of impacts and losses for the year. Now, in terms of recovery, Again, everyone's looking in a crystal ball, but based on the best numbers we have, we're expecting slowly, and we're seeing some recovery in Q3 and hopefully accelerating in Q4. Unfortunately, news that we're getting by regions are not moving as fast. Recovery is not going as fast as we're all expected. But hopefully better news to come. We're talking just very recently of a period of about 3 years to get back to numbers of 2019. Now we're starting to revise those to looking even to 4 years in terms of recuperating passenger volumes, and maybe a year less than that for to the flight movements. Now, hopefully those numbers will start not getting worse, but they're getting better at a certain time. And discussions that we're going to have, collaboration is key. Alignment in all we do is going to be a priority to make sure to have a better story to tell. And of course, we're all in this together. But looking forward to discuss some of these solutions from different angles and different visions and different ideas to make sure we can collaborate and bring these numbers to much better ones, and hopefully more rapidly than the ones I just shared with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Antoine, for the scene. Not a great one, but I guess a lot of it is down to the local restrictions in place, quarantines that still haven't been released. I know that's affecting ACI Europe put out some numbers today. They've pushed back their recovery forecast because of the continuing quarantine. So we're kind of prisoners to fortune a little bit with the way that plays out. But there is an uptick. We've seen it in the UK, definitely, and I presume maybe also in Central Europe, continental Europe. So I was going to ask our two airport representatives, starting with Ersin, just to paint a little picture about how a passenger journey is looking now as you are bringing your businesses out of hibernation, and then how you see that changing.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. I mean, I'm saying hello to all our audience. I'm seeing that, I mean, a lot of people is there. And yeah, just, you know, that we are the new airport. Just we opened it 2018, I mean, the April 7th. And our expectation for 2020 is to reach with the 72 million passenger. But unfortunately, this COVID, the 19 outbreak has just come up. And technology-wise, we were very strong. I mean, because of the using the advantage of the Nevis airport, just we already ready for the infrastructure. Like our airport is ready for the 5G full coverage of the Wi-Fi. We have the Bluetooth 5.0 infrastructure, and also we are using the biggest LoRa infrastructure in Turkey, and we are collecting a lot of information from 10 kilometers away. And also we already develop our own mobile apps. Why I'm just giving this example, because this infrastructure really help a lot to recover all these things for this COVID outbreak. And we also using the QMS, the queuing management system for the heat map for the purposes, and the smart car park opportunities also. As you know, and as you're aware, we already, redesign our journey, just because with the middle of March, we face with the lockdown, we lose 92% of our flights. And it's mean that it's a big loss. And we just trying to redesign our journey. We just trying to take every measure against the COVID outbreak, from starting from the check-in till the boarding processes. We just start to warn our passenger from their home. We are with our own mobile apps. We already download with 700,000 people. Just give the notification to our passenger about the new regulation and the new normal. And then we just, once they arrive there,
Thanks, Ersin. We're getting quite a lot of background noise from you. I don't know if that's in your office.
I think from
okay, thanks, Ersin, for that. I'll just, while you look at your sound, I'll just talk to Chris, who's from Heathrow Airport. Chris, could you just tell us a little bit about how you're bringing business back? So I'm just conscious we've got some sound coming through still, even though the person's muted.
I mean, it was not me, by the way.
No, okay, fine. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Chris. Sorry about that. Sorry, Chris, if you could just talk us through the way that Heathrow is coming back to business. I know it's been a slow recovery for you, and obviously there's been some uncertainty around the quarantine regulations, but you are starting to see some volume now, I think, coming into some of the terminals.
Well, yes, and thanks, Max, and welcome everybody to the call. Hope you and your families are staying safe and well in these unprecedented times. Heathrow has remained open throughout this pandemic, but as Max quite rightly says, and Antoine says, passenger numbers are down. In fact, for those of my age, the last time Heathrow saw passenger numbers at this level, it was 1971. So that gives you another way of looking at the impact of this virus. And the reason we remained open was we are the UK's largest cargo port by value, and our borders have remained open. So we've had a number of passengers who've routed through Heathrow en route back to their home countries. We are seeing an uptick, but there are two things we've really had to fix in the period since March. The first, as Ersin was describing, was the end-to-end passenger journey to make sure that the airport is safe for passengers and colleagues to travel through. And we've done that, and you will see those changes through the airport, both departures, transfers, arrivals. There are changes in place now. The next step is slightly more difficult because it's to answer the question, how do we reopen international travel? And this is a dilemma for all of us. And we've been promoting a risk-based approach. We're very pleased that the UK government has adopted that approach. And you now see that there are countries where the risk of infection is low, can now travel freely to the UK without quarantine or testing. And we're working hard now with the government and other international hubs to answer the question, how do we reopen aviation to higher risk countries? And in that situation, we believe testing will be the major risk control that we'll need to implement. So still a lot of work to do, but we're pleased to see that the business is coming back and travellers are returning.
So from a testing perspective, is that technology that you are readying or you already have in place, or where are you at with that?
We have a government test facility on one of our long stay car parks, which has been repurposed as a test facility. And we're working with government to trial a number of point of care tests, because the difficulty of many of the current PCR tests is the time taken to get a result, because a laboratory process is involved in deriving the result. So we have trials at the moment of point of care technology that, if it's successful, could be deployed in check-in as a way of testing those passengers who need it. But obviously, in a risk-based process, we are proposing that testing would only apply if you were traveling from a high-risk country to a lower-risk country. If it's low risk to low risk, there's no need for testing or quarantine. So the volume of testing does not necessarily need to be as high as you might expect.
Thank you, Chris. We'll come back to some of this in more detail later, but I just wanted to talk to Tony actually about the tech side, because there's a perception aspect to travel, which is so important. You can discount the fares as much as you like, but you're not going to get the volumes coming back, even if the regulations around quarantine are relaxed. If people don't feel like the journey is going to be safe and also, I wouldn't say enjoyable, but perhaps not too much hassle involved. So is there anything that you see, Tony, from a technology perspective that is, I wouldn't say oven baked, but perhaps is ready and waiting or near to being ready, that could help with that aspect of the post-COVID-19 airport world?
Thanks, Max, and extend my welcome to everybody. Hope everybody's safe and well. Yeah, I think the journey through the airport And I guess we should look at the journey as being end to end, which includes transit to the airport itself, and then onwards from that. But concentrating on the airport itself, as you rightly say, a lot of it is instilling confidence, and I think making the existing processes as touchless as is possible. Ultimately, we would like to get to touch-free, but we can do some things in the short term to both make it fewer touch points, physical touch points, and then also the social distancing aspects. Do we need to concentrate on social distancing? If we do, how do you separate social distance between a family group and a non-family group, for example? We can all tell if you're 6 foot apart, but is it the same family? That adds another level of complexity. The wearing of facial masks, again, we can detect if you're wearing a facial mask, but then what? Do we need to then have apps that direct somebody to that passenger wherever they are in the terminal to encourage them to wear a mask? So there's existing short-term fixes, remote control of kiosks, for example. Can you control a kiosk, an existing application, with a mobile phone? That's a very short-term, reduces contact in the immediate effect. What can we do with the existing check-in desks, given that passengers will have to visit a desk in some circumstances? How do we make those less contactable, if that's the right word? But for example, turn printers around, turn passport readers around, so you don't have to exchange those documents with the customer service agent, and you can handle those documents yourself. So short-term solutions leading to a longer term of making the airport, in our view, touch-free. Touch-free can include biometrics. I know biometrics was a technology that had started well before COVID. From what we're seeing in the inquiries we're getting, COVID is increasing the demand for biometric solutions end to end. There's still many issues to address with that, including data privacy and so on, but it is accelerating the acceptance of biometrics. And different airports around the world want to implement it in many different ways. Some in the short term to record the fact that you have completed a local health questionnaire, and you don't have to, by scanning your face, you can complete, this airport in particular wants to confirm you have completed that, to the full end-to-end journey. So many different technologies, existing technologies, just repurposed and accelerating the use of.
And Max, if I may jump in on this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
I mean, just to re-emphasize those great points from Tony, if there's one good news, like Tony was saying, is really the opportunity to accelerate change on some of these technologies in terms of standards, but in terms of being able to have more of these touchless and ID on the move type of solutions. Often the technology is not the challenge, but it's regulations that are associated to it. So maybe there's an opportunity there for states, and we're working very hard with ICAO just across the street here, where I'm based in Montreal, to try to encourage states to actually relook regulations to make sure that we facilitate the introduction of some of these technologies. So just my 2 cents on this. Thanks.
Okay. So to that, it's not only states and regulations, I think it's airline processes that may have been baked into a process for a number of years. Is there an opportunity to review those processes and change them as necessary to optimize the whole passenger experience, but also reduce contact?
In other words, I guess, is this the spark or the or that kind of sea change that we need to bring these technologies really into play? We've talked about these for many years. Some of them are playing out, but others haven't. And this might be actually the catalyst to make that happen, because if you don't adapt your business and you just adopt the technology for the technology's sake, it's not going to work properly, right?
Exactly that.
Yeah. So Ersin, you have the newest, I'm not sure if it's the newest airport in the world, but it's certainly the newest airport in Europe and possibly outside China. Would you like to talk through some of the technology that you've brought in? Because you had that clean sheet capability with without the COVID aspects to your planning, but with technology and seamless travel. And talk through some of that you were able to implement as part of the airport's creation over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just try to explain that before. They change all the way of our passenger. I mean, we just redesigned the digital journey of the passenger. And now just we are trying to touch our passenger from their home with our mobile apps, because this is so critical now. Just we warn them about the new normal and the regulations. And once they arrive at the airport, just we meet them with the thermal cameras. I mean, because our airport's entrance is, there is the X-rays also. Just we monitor their temperature and sending this information to our center of the healthcare. And also we already established a hygiene team, like the 97 people. And these the ladies and the guys just looking for our passenger, our stakeholders, and all the, the concessionaires, that if they are, they're obeying the rules of the regulations. And there's just some of them then also wearing the smart helmets. This is the newest technology that you already, the monitoring the group of the people's temperature at the same time, like 10, 20 people at the same time. And this also, the helmet is sending through IoT infrastructure to this information to our, the center of the health department. And we already put, a lot of hygiene automats for the mask and the hand sanitizer. And the newest things that we already put everywhere, the sanitization mats to clean the shoes and disinfect the shoes. And also we already put the ultraviolet machines, before the X-ray machines, that this is the cleaning the trays and the bags also. This is also new. And we are also moving to touchless technology for all our kiosks. Now we are using the QR barcodes, and it takes just, the 1 or 2 months to, move these technologies. And also we are, using a lot for the QMS, the crowd management system, that we are monitoring with the heat maps opportunities to see where our crowd, and just we are getting in touch with the hygiene team to solve the issues. As Chris mentioned, we already put the 2 PCR laboratory inside the airport, and one of them is at the land side, the second one is at the air side. This laboratory is just taking, you get the result in 2.5 hours, and the departure passenger would like to, if they would like to make a test, they can. And of course, now digital signage is turning on to, the warning our passenger. A lot of training videos and the information just we are pushing through the digital signage to our passenger. This is the new things that we already using in our airport.
That's great. Thank you, Asin. I have a question actually from one of our delegates, attendees, Henk Ombelet, who works for Sirium, a firm that we used to be associated with at FlightGlobal. And Henk asks about the hassle factor from travel. And I suppose I'll adapt his question because it kind of comes on something I was going to ask anyway. He asked, does the panel think that the new level of travel hassles, health check, COVID test, mask during flights, risks of traveling, not just the airplane, but also through the airport and from and to the airport, will structurally reduce demand? So I guess if you think that is the case, which it may well be, how does the airport then address what it can address from its perspective? So I'll put that to you, Chris, initially, because obviously you're seeing Heathrow's, which was one of the world's busiest airports prior to the crisis.
I think what will be interesting to see, and obviously it is a little bit sort of gazing into the future, but we've seen a lot of progress since March. So in March, our only real detection capability was an infrared camera, since described the process, but it has limitations. Now we have testing, but the testing has a delay, but we see testing technology coming through. We anticipate that as we go forward, we hope that a vaccine will be found and eventually a cure. And clearly, if this becomes another of the known diseases that has a cure, then none of the controls we're talking about today, masks and so on, will be relevant. So I think we have to think of the time-bound nature of some of these controls on the assumption of progress. Now, if the assumption today is there's no progress medicinally, and this is it for the rest of all time, then we do have to start to address issues like social distancing, because, as I'm constantly reminded, a queue from an A380 at 2 meters apart is a kilometre queue. So It's not going to be possible within airport infrastructure to be able to host the same volumes of passengers, and typically we might be looking at only 40% of today's capability being possible if we had to social distance. So masks are a well utilized and proven alternative to social distancing. It's the basis of control that most aircraft are going to use and are using today. And so we've moved all our colleagues and passengers into face coverings, and we practice social distancing where we can, but we recognize that it's not always possible to maintain social distancing, and so the face covering acts as the mitigation to any residual risk, and that seems to be working well for us. Now, that control will stay in place until more rapid point of care testing comes through, or potentially vaccine and cure in the future.
And I think on this, actually, to amplify the points from Chris, we have to push for data-based decision making, and to make sure that whatever stages and health requirements are pushed to our airports remain only during the time when they're needed, based on medical facts outside the airport. Now, we've seen in the past some situation on the security side when different events took place and measures were deployed, situations changed, but measures stayed at airports. We have to avoid that. And we want to make sure also that in a local city, that measures deployed in a city match the measures deployed at the airport. You would want everyone crammed up in a shuttle, a bus or train going from downtown to the airport, and then having to distance for 2 meters or whatever the distance is required there at the airport. So there has to be a database and a constant review of these different stages in looking forward, and hopefully measures do not stay the same.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think one of our strengths, Max, and Antoine makes a good point, we're an international business, aviation. We have built relationships and we rely on one another, and aviation security is a good model for aviation health. And in many respects, the things that we are adopting are modeling the international approach to aviation security, but replacing the word security with passenger health and colleague health. And the same principle of a departing airport looking after the health of those who are traveling on behalf of the arriving airport. And we believe that's the basis of a common international standard, in the same way we have a common international standard for aviation security.
It's interesting your point you make about the inoculation program. I'm sure everyone heard Tim Clark talking about this on a webinar he did for the Arabian travel market a couple of weeks ago, where he felt fairly bullish about the recovery and the 380 that you mentioned with its kilometre-long queue coming back. But I think he pinned all that on the need for an inoculation program. So that has to be in the assumption plan, I guess, for everybody in the short, well, maybe not the short term, but the medium term for this industry, I guess, doesn't it, Chris?
Well, but the medicine and the medical advice seems to be that the use of face coverings is quite compelling. We learned a lot from our colleagues in Hong Kong. They have successfully restarted both aviation and the metro services and so on, with almost no infection within the city. And they're using, and it's something they've done before for SARS and MERS, they're using face coverings. And so in the UK, we've adopted face coverings on all public transport across the country. And again, are we looking at a second peak? We don't know, but we don't think so. So there is something to be said for face coverings as an alternative to social distancing.
And Tony, when you're looking at the market requirements, which have changed dramatically, I think, in the last 6 months, I mean, the use case that we're talking about today, no one I think had really envisaged even in January this year, but certainly not outside of China. Do you see there's technology that you can use to, regardless of whether there's an inoculation program or not, rapidly brought in, that will be in demand because of a change in passenger behaviour going forward?
Yeah, we believe that the biometric, the single token journey would then become expected. If you can move through an airport without having to queue, you can move freely without having to produce boarding passes and passports and multiple touch points, that will then become the expectation, I believe, such that the free movement through the airport will become a customer demand, passenger demand for that type of process and that type of experience. So the technology that we're now accelerating because of COVID will be required when hopefully COVID is over in 9-12 months time, whatever it is.
So where will that be implemented first? Who do you think is going to be leading the market with that in terms of early adoption?
So we're already implementing in many airports around the world. It doesn't seem to be region or country centric. It seems to be general requirement. As I said before, their regions are implementing in slightly different ways, but the concept is still the same. How can I move through the journey by using my passport once and once only, and then therefore travel through the rest of the outbound journey? That
Right.
extends to, we have to think, and Chris and Ursula have their own views on that. A good portion of revenue, airport revenue, comes from ancillary sales. So how can we then use that to encourage those sales? The duty-free becomes duty-free sales, and use that single token to pay for that type of service, as well as actually transit through the airport itself.
Yeah, and we've built a number of click and collect services in our international departure areas for shops and for food sort of pick up and go. So we have a sort of picnic in a box kind of offering, and we also have the ability to browse from your own phone and then click and collect, rather than having to perhaps go and transact in a traditional way in a shop. Which you can still do, and with face coverings and obviously good hand hygiene, that's possible. And where we have colleagues, we've tended to protect them with Perspex shields. So you'll see at check-in desks and so on that it's got more of a screen in front of the desk to protect the colleague and the passenger from one another. But Tony's point about the token journey has a health benefit for colleagues, because you can remove the colleague from the direct flow of the passenger. So there's a benefit for the passenger in terms of only producing their documents once, but if colleagues don't have to stand close in front of passengers, there's also a health benefit for colleagues.
I would like to add,
Sure.
Tony just point out very good point. The point about that, the token journey, but the problem, like us for the airports, just would like to use this token journey with the biometrics, is just struggling with the GDPR also. Is GDPR is there, and we just would like to get the biometrics, and using this with the shoppings and all the areas is good. But I would like to get the opinion about Tony, especially how the GDPR will gonna be, the place at Europe, especially for the Europe, and also affecting the Turkey a lot. And there is a lot of way for overcoming this issue, but still none of the airport, they fully passed the token journey, starting from check-in to, the boarding. What's their idea?
So from a GDPR perspective, I think clearly we have to give passenger the rights that they don't have to use it. They have to confirm that they do want to enroll in the program. They have the right to then unenroll should they choose to do so. And then the data privacy, given that we're talking about the outbound journey only, it stays at the airport, it gets purged at the end of the day. So we have to be clear to passengers what the data is being used for, and more importantly, what it's not being used for. It is only being used for your journey through the airport and nothing else. I think that's where a number of the concerns come from, is, oh, they're tracking me and they're going to track me forevermore. Well, that's clearly not the case, but we have to be, as an industry, we have to articulate that position much clearer, I think, that people can pick up the negatives of what's not told. If you don't tell them explicitly, they'll assume something else. So I think GDPR requirements, yes, absolutely, we have to adhere to those and give the passenger the right to not use the technology if that's what they're uncomfortable with. But some of the experience in North America here, where it is being used for boarding outbound international flights, is the actual people who actually decline to be used is actually very low. The percentage is very low. Yeah. And that once the passenger sees the benefit of it and understands what it's being used for, they're quite ready, quite prepared to then utilize it.
So it's about getting buy-in from the customers, from the passengers. on that from that sense. Is that what you're saying, Tony? Really?
Yeah, I think we need to educate the passenger of what it is being used for and how it is being used. And then we are not using it outside of the airport. It is only being used for the process through the airport. And we're not going to track you when you go down to the local supermarket. It's not like that at all. There are some fears that once you enroll in a program, you're going to track me everywhere. And clearly that is not the case.
I think it's when you see the people that have registered for the facial recognition overtaking everybody in the fast track queue, that will get a much better buy. I remember coming back on a trip with Willie Walsh actually when he was BA CEO, and he was on the facial recognition program that Heathrow was running at immigration. And he just overtook all the journalists and he just disappeared. We never saw him again. I was straight down the next time I was at the airport registering for that superb program, which of course you don't have anymore at the moment. But I guess I was going to ask actually on that specific point around GDPR being a potential blocker to the adoption of that technology. Is that one of the key ones, or are there any others that you'd flag, Tony, or perhaps one of the airport people, or even Antoine, that you see that need to be overcome to make this technology become more widely adopted?
I don't think GDPR in itself is a blocker, as long as we're clear on what we're doing and we provide to the passenger all their rights that they have by enrolling and the option to not enroll.
And I think, like you mentioned, there has to be a clear gain for the passenger for any technology that's offered to them, and an opportunity to personalize, customize the processes that they want to use. In order to protect access to private data, private life, etc., there are ways of doing so. I mean, in the industry, we're talking about using blockchain, and there's others as well. There's ways to go around that and give back the control to passengers, to give access and opt-in, like Tony was saying, to different opportunities. But I think from a passenger, the core is to be able to also offer a process where a lot more can be done before passengers arrive at the airport, for example, and break down the process, go as upstream as possible, because then it facilitates efficiency, throughput, enjoyment, experience, service at the airport. And at this time, again, like Chris was saying, we could do a very close parallel between security and health measures, but also efficiency. The goal, we want to avoid crowds and queues, and we want to be as efficient as possible and bring the journey from a service and experience much better. Technology is a way of doing so, and offering different options that can be done before the passenger arrives, on their way, at the parking lot, in the terminal, but it's all interrelated, and technology plays, of course, a core role in there while protecting the data of passengers.
Yeah, can we do more off-airport check-in? And I don't mean check-in itself, I mean check-in and bag drop. Can I get rid of my bag long before I arrive at the airport, for example, and then reduce the congestion in the check-in hall?
Yeah, it's helpful to be clean sheet design when you're doing that, of course, but I know that Tim Clark's talked about his vision for the Dubai World Central, and obviously with Paul Griffiths, who is involved with Dubai Airports as well, they talked about that. They have the benefit of a clean field, green field or desert field site. Just talking about the congestion in the airports, we have a question from the floor. I can see airports and airlines can manage their processes to offer reduced touch points as much as possible. But some of the photos have shown very congested passport control areas. Where are the major problem areas and can they be solved? I'll put that to Chris to begin with, because I guess that's not a problem you've got at the moment, but you may have that coming as the volumes build.
And it can be a problem depending on additional control. So we in the UK have an additional control that's been introduced at the border for all arriving passengers to fill out a declaration and a contact tracing form. And just as Tony was saying, we need to go upstream. The reason for getting congestion at the border is the number of passengers who arrive not being aware that they needed to fill out the form, or believing that perhaps they might be exempt from filling out the form. So when they arrive into the immigration hall, they can't get through the border until they complete their details. And this is back to this point about, if social distancing is the only thing we can do, then we're going to limit our capacity. And so we've been trying to look at ways in which we can, back to face coverings that allow passengers to be closer together without the risk escalating of them infecting one another. And equally trying now with our airline partners to try and make sure that the paperwork is completed electronically on departure, back to that aviation security analogy, rather than waiting to arrive to then discover. So we are aiming to get back to a fairly rapid flow through e-gates because we've already registered passengers' details. But in the early days of the virus, we found that compliance with the forms was very low. So we were having to intercept passengers at e-gates and say, can I see your form? We now have much better compliance, and we're working towards a system of trying to get the departing aircraft to confirm that passengers have all completed their details. So by getting this registered into airline systems in the future, this would be a way of ensuring that it's completed once upstream, and then we remove the need for congestion downstream through the journey.
And is that rollout an ongoing process?
It is, and obviously some countries the borders are closed. There's very little flying going on, so there's very little opportunity for dialogue. Other countries we are working very closely with to build up that awareness.
Antoine, is that something that ACI World is looking to try and get some sort of standards adopted as best you can from an airport perspective from your members?
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. We're very involved on several of these entities, especially from government entities, immigration, customs, with ICAO, again, to set standards and recommended practices worldwide. Of course, working hand in hand with IATA and airlines, and of course, all our members, to try to identify a solution that best fit every airport, so to have options as well. Technology, again, I mean, Chris described a certain option using electronic type of information gathering. So that could be done as soon as you touch digital solutions, it can be done remotely as well, or ahead of time, or at landing, at departure, or even on flights when there's Wi-Fi. Automated border control, self-service type of devices that use biometrics. Of course, from biometrics, you want to move away from touching the digital, but moving to face recognition and iris, again, on a touchless situation. But there's a lot of ABC, automated border control solution, that immigration and customs offer nowadays in a lot of airports. Can we improve of those? I think there's a good comparison to be done with the check-in process that changed over time. Before, everything was done in one place with long queues. The process has been broken down with different options offered to passengers that can choose to do things at different areas, from home to the airport, talking to someone or not. Same thing on the customs, same thing with a security screening. There's options to use a much more risk-based approach and offer different channels to different passengers. This reduces the queues, the gathering of people, doing things beyond. It's different touch points, but the same principles, personally, I think can be reapplied.
Thank you. And quite a long question, so bear with me while I read this out. It's come from the floor. How important is it to concentrate on solutions that can add value long-term as opposed to solely a short-term fix? There's more to this, but that comes back to Chris's point about the assumptions around an inoculation program. Is there a point in making significant major investment in touchless check-in kiosks that may be integrated with health check when a vaccine may alleviate these issues anyway? Furthermore, does the responsibility lie with the airport or the airline? In fact, that's another whole avenue of discussion, which we'll talk about in a moment, which is who's going to pay for this. But just in terms of those general points, I know we have sort of touched upon this already, but maybe anyone who particularly wants to say something, or I could pick somebody. Maybe Tony could, as the supplier of technology, could talk about what you hear from the use cases that have suddenly appeared in 2020 versus the more familiar ones from before and perhaps after the virus has passed through.
I think, as we said before, we do need short-term solutions that may not be used in the longer term, although it will lead to developments that will create different solutions. So kiosks, for example, remote control of kiosks. I think the passenger expectation is that they touch as little as possible. Therefore, we're going to have to implement those to give passengers confidence to actually travel in the first place.
And that probably isn't going to change, is it? Even with an inoculation.
Correct, but applications themselves may change to become require less contact in the first place. We're already seeing some examples of that going on at the moment. So I think we have to go through that stage. We said before that I keep coming back to the biometric journey. That was already starting well before COVID. COVID is accelerating it, but will be in place far beyond COVID. It'll be here forever because it gives, I think you said, Antoine, the passenger control. They have different experience. They can use different processes that suits their own benefits and their own needs. So those type of processes will remain. Social distancing, are we going to put complex systems in for social distancing? I can let Ursula and Chris answer to that, but is that only a short-term solution if we believe a vaccine will be available next year? But that in itself leads to another, if a vaccine is available, how do then people authenticate that they've had the vaccine? And what will different countries require to cross their borders? So is there another technology that's required to then track who's had a vaccine, how long is it valid for, that a country will accept to enter into the or cross the border? So I do believe we need short-term solutions to give passenger confidence, to get them flying before we then decide whether those short-term solutions remain.
I'd agree totally, Tony. I think the other aspect that we need to take the learning from this particular pandemic is that our only global response was to shut down aviation. That was the best solution we could come up with, and the subsequent impact on everybody's GDP. Part of the learning going forward needs to be how, for any future pandemic, would we manage the risk in a different way so that we didn't shut down aviation, but we did step up all of our short-term and long-term controls so that we could deal with the threat that we were facing, because that feels like a better use of the resources we've got rather than just closing everything down and saying, well, let's wait and hope it goes away.
And whose responsibility should it be, Chris?
It's all of us, and as an airport operator, I'm clear that if my airlines are not successful, there's not a lot of future in being an airport operator. So I think my job is to work, with my other airport colleagues and aviation colleagues, Tony's technology providers as well. We have to work together because we are an integrated supply chain. At the end of our chain is the passenger, and we all have to focus on the passenger and on what's right and safe and correct for them, because that's how we'll reassure them that it's good to fly and it's safe to fly. And obviously we all benefit when flying resumes, and we all fail if flying doesn't resume.
Presumably, Yasin, that's your approach as well to the way this is tackled.
Yeah, I mean, just I'm at the same page also. Just contactless technologies, or the social distancing solution, because we are also trying to put some technologies, put the sensors to the avoid for social distancing, but it's really hard. I'm using the cameras or the sensors for social distancing. We're gonna help, but for like us, like 72 million passenger, 250,000 passenger a day is not very easy. And the best case is the finding, the vaccine or the medicines. This is the way, or just using the face cover or the mask is the only solution. But I see that we're gonna put the technology everywhere, but it will not be end solution. As I agree with my friends.
Thank you, Antoine. So we were going to talk about this anyway, but in terms of the technology that's required specifically around the coronavirus pandemic, how is that being funded? And is there an agreed approach to that, or do you think there is still some discussion to be had?
Well, I think we got to really make a difference between technology that increases efficiency, and we talked about a lot of those, and technology really specifically related to health measures, and it would be the temperature or would be some testing or things like this. I think any health measures requirement is a responsibility of the state, of the government, and should be funded by the government. And ACI has been very, very clear on this. And not only funded, but of course with getting support to different stakeholders of the industry. Airports are of course a big part of it, but airlines as well and others. In terms of technology that helps the throughput of an airport, I think it was Tony that was mentioning, this started way before the pandemic. Is it being accelerated right now? And I think in terms of investment for facilitating throughput and efficiency of an airport, it remains the airport authority usually that funds this. because it affects the efficiency in being able to maximize usage of the infrastructure and the installation of an airport. The health measures have to be funded and supported by government entities. First of all, they have the expertise to do so. We're airports specialists or technology specialists, not medical specialists. We're relying on guidance on what measures need to be deployed from the state, hopefully in alignment. That's very important. And in terms of alignment, I mean, there's a CART document from ICAO with everyone, IATA, ACI, and states being involved that provide guidance. And often it's to choose from different measures because it has to be outcome-based, not prescriptive in terms of what needs to be done, but the result is what is important. The funding of pure medical requirements and health checks should be done by governments and states.
I see you nodding there, Chris and Ersin.
I think a proxy for the state might be the passenger in terms of testing. So we wonder whether if testing was an alternative to quarantine, how many passengers might choose to pay an amount to be tested in order to avoid a quarantine, and back to giving passengers choice. Some passengers might choose to, some might not, and that would be fine as long as it's safe for all passengers, whichever choice you make. So I would agree that airports can't start getting into medical testing. That's not our area of core competence. I think that's absolutely correct, as Antoine says, but we're here to facilitate, we're here to help, we're here to try and provide some leadership and some brain power to find solutions if we can.
Yeah, I mean, as Antoine mentioned, that, I mean, I'm also thinking that to make an obligation to test all the passenger is not going to be work. I mean, it's really also hard. I mean, because if the passenger don't want to make this test, what's the regulation? What we're going to happen to what the airport operators we're going to do? What the airline we're going to do? I mean, that's why the registration authority. It should be an IATA, ICAO, ICA, or or World Health, the organization or something should put some of the rules for airports. Then all the big airports and all the smallest ones should be applied on this.
Thank you, Ersin. We're just running into the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes of this chat, and it's been a great discussion. Thank you for all your input. We've covered a lot of ground. And I've got a question which is kind of linked actually to one we've had from the floor around the business sort of proposition that an airport is, which is just a great big shopping center as well as everything else. And it's about retail. And so there's not a technology question as such, but it could come into play, I guess. I'm curious how airports see themselves in the short to medium term in the current operating environment, managing to use that dwell time that they've used so effectively in the past through their retail outlets, how they see that challenge being tackled in the short to medium term. Are you able to let people go into the shops? You talked, Chris, about the click and collect type thing, but really you want people in shops browsing and buying expensive watches and stuff, don't you? So how's that going to play out in the short to medium term? Chris, maybe you could answer that.
Value for money watches, I think you meant to say, Max.
Of course, yeah.
But I know what you meant. Yeah, they are, some are. Well, I think short term we're able to operate reasonably similarly. You know, again, Sim mentioned the use of face coverings. That really helps. We have the perspex screens. We have the distancing within the shop, so you can still go into shops and shop, and it's no different to going into your local shops, to your supermarket or whatever. The same sort of controls are there.
So you have somebody managing with a clicker or something.
There's some managing of the social distance where it's needed, but with masks and face coverings, it's possible to one-way flows, all of that sort of stuff we're doing. The enhanced hygiene, use of UV. Ersin talked us through all of that, and we do all of that. I think what will be interesting to see, and it's perhaps a bit early, is does this virus change the interests and the nature of the retail that passengers are seeking? So food and beverage is probably still something that passengers want to avail of, and they may want to do that in a more spaced and distanced way for their own peace of mind. But are they going to shop in the same way? Are they going to be looking for the same products? And it's probably too early to tell. But we are responding to passenger needs as we see them, and we're very active in terms of gathering insight from regular travellers and organisations that we work with to try and understand how those demographics are changing.
Antoine, did you have any thoughts on this important aspect of your members' business model?
Yes, of course, non-aeronautical revenues play a key role, and we mentioned it at the beginning also of this webinar, and it has to be ways to provide access, and Chris named some examples from London Heathrow, but we need to find ways to provide access to all our retail and food and beverage and other services that can be offered. It's again related to efficiency of the and throughput of having different measures and technologies to provide maximized space. But we know that during this pandemic, we need to have health measures adapted to facilitate access, but not to limit or close too much access. So again, I won't repeat some of the examples that Chris provided. Some technologies that can be provided as well to make the information more accessible beforehand as well. For some passengers, again, it's a choice of passengers. Some might be able to reserve, pick up a bit at the airport or things like this. They could be on-site deliverables at different areas or pickup. Usually it's a combination of things and some airports have been very creative on that side of things. But also on the regulation side, we want to make sure that, let's say on duty free, there's limits in a lot of countries in terms of how much you can buy. Can we increase those to, again, encourage airports as economic key engines locally and facilitate the buying of different goods and services at airports? So it's a multitude of different steps, but definitely we need to be proactive on this and facilitate it.
Am I remembering this correctly, that there used to be people used to fly back in the 80s to Amsterdam Schiphol to go shopping, right? That used to happen, didn't it? I don't think it happens these days, but maybe that could be a future.
Yes, but it is, it plays a key role also, and so I'm sure that my colleagues would confirm this as well. Passengers on connection make choices. We're competing. We're a very competitive environment, and especially on connection, and people do also in terms of the airport they like and the process they like, but also the shopping, the services, and when you have 2, 3, 4 hours between flights, you all travel quite a bit. I'm sure you know the places you prefer, so it becomes a competitive advantage.
Ersin, you, just by way of a wrap on this point before we finally finish today's webinar, just from your airport's perspective, I haven't been to your new airport. I went to your previous one in Istanbul many times. I presume you've got lots of shops, and how are you finding the business there in the current environment?
Of course, I mean, the business is going to change a lot. I mean, especially for the loyalty sides and the F&B and the Unifree sides also. We are also seeing that when I'm pushing a lot for the e-commerce platforms, and also we are just working for a new wallet solution that, like, I mean, once you download my app, you're gonna get the wallet also. This wallet we're gonna be you're gonna put the $1,000 and you're gonna spend in our airport $1,100 or something. We are just working for remote technologies and the e-commerce a lot, pushing, and also for digital assistance, we're going to be helped a lot, because the passenger would not be at the congestions, and they're going to use their mobile devices a lot to use, I mean, to create a token or just chat with somewhere to get the information about airport. That's why we are also pushing the assistant, the AI assistance technologies also. The business model for the F&B and the Unifree, we're gonna morely remote sales. We're gonna place on that one, and for the passenger perspective, what I'm believing that the loyalty we're gonna change a lot, because the safety we're gonna be the first, health we're gonna be the first, the loyalty we're gonna be the second.
Right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Just before we finish today's discussion, I just want to remind all our delegates that have tuned in today that we actually had almost around 350 delegates at one point. Lots of questions. Sorry we didn't get to more of them today. You can watch this back, and you can see our webinar program for FlightGlobal at flightglobal.com/webinars, and there's a lot coming down the chain at the moment. We've got three next week for the Farnborough show, the virtual Farnborough show. Then we've also got another one on cargo towards the end of July, and even more in August. So please check that for the latest information on our webinars. All that leaves me to do now is to say thank you so much to our guests, to Chris, to Tony, to Ersin, and to Antoine. Thank you so much to Collins Aerospace, who we produced this webinar in association with. So thank you to Collins. And thanks also to my backroom guys, Chloe and Lewis, for all the hard work you put into this. So thank you very much. And everyone, please stay safe and have a good afternoon and evening.
Yeah, thank you very much. Keep well, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.